So I will say we are going to be doing things a little bit differently tonight. We're going to have a different moderator this evening and host. And we also will be allowing folks to participate throughout the presentation. So it's more conversational and discussion based. So please feel free to unmute and participate how you would like to or when you would like to. If you would also like to just put your stuff in the chat, that's perfectly fine. Savannah is going to be our moderator and she can pose any questions throughout. And then we'll also have a little bit of time at the end for questions and answers. As I said, my name is Allison. If you need anything, please feel free to send me a chat during the presentation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Savannah Wood, fellow BCHS board member and moderator for this evening.
Thanks, Allison, and thank you everybody for being here tonight. I'm really excited to host this evening. It's my first time hosting a Baltimore History Evening. As Allison mentioned, my name is Savannah Wood. I am a Baltimore City Historical Society board member, and here we are tonight with Webster Phillips. Before we get into Webster's presentation, I want to plug our next program, which is on April 15th with Amy Nathan and Sharon Langley. That program is titled A Ride to Remember from Gwynn Oak Amusement Park to the National Mall. Amy Nathan and Sharon Langley are co-authors of A Ride to Remember, a Civil Rights Story, which was published by Abrams Books for Young Readers in 2020. This book tells the story of Gwynn Oak Amusement Park and the 1963 civil rights demonstrations that led to its desegregation. And the narrative is told from co-author Sharon Langley's perspective. Her family was among one of the first Black families to be admitted to the park, and there's an iconic photograph of her that was captured on the carousel there. This is a talk that will be suitable for young audiences as well as adults, so we hope that you'll spread the word to your friends with young children, as well as any teachers who may be interested in sharing this subject matter with their students. You can find all information about our upcoming events at baltimorecityhistoricalsociety.org. Tonight, and for our full 2021 program, we are really thankful for our sponsors, Trace Architects and Arcadia Publishing. Trace Architects is committed to using architecture as a tool for neighborhood sustainability. They are passionate about the profession, which translates into projects that energize not only the individual, but the community. And Arcadia Publishing is the nation's leading publisher of books of local history and local interest. Their mission is to connect people with their past, with their communities, and with each other. Arcadia has an extraordinary catalog of more than 15,000 local titles and publishes 500 new books of local interest and local history each year. So thanks to our sponsors. You're seeing I have not enough space on my iCloud to save this document. I know, we can talk about that later. Tonight, I'm really excited to hear from Webster Phillips for our March Baltimore History Evening, which is titled Through the Lens of Three Generations, the Phillips Family of Photographers. Like his father and grandfather before him, Webster is a Baltimore-based photographer and entrepreneur who documents daily life in the city. All three generations have photographed for the Afro-American newspapers, and Webster's father is the Baltimore Sun's first Black photographer. Between the three of them, the family has captured nearly a century of Baltimore history in its photographs. And in 2015, the Baltimore City Historical Society honored the Phillips family during our annual Baltimore History Honors Program. Over the past decade or so, Webster has been digitizing his grandfather's collection of photographic negatives through his I. Henry Photo Project. And tonight, as Allison mentioned, he'll be sharing some of those photos with us, but we're also looking to have a little bit of a discussion. So if you have questions about any of the photos, feel free to either put them in the chat, ask them aloud yourself, and we can have a bit of a robust discussion about it. So without further ado, I want to introduce Webster and say thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you guys for having me. My screen just blew up with everybody's faces. So it's good to see you guys. I see a couple people that I recognize. I see Bill Zorzi. It's like a different cut than the last time I saw you, the COVID cut.
It is the COVID cut. Sorry. It's just, and yours a little long yourself, I see.
A little bit. So yeah, so I'm gonna run through a PDF of some images. I'm kind of flow through it really quickly, but if you have any questions while I'm kind of jumping through, feel free to just kind of chime in and ask a question, and hopefully I have an answer for you If not, then maybe one day we'll find out those answers. A little bit of what I've been doing the last year or two is trying to find out a lot of the historical information behind the photos. So we've been doing some ID sessions, going to senior centers and posting some photos online, trying to get as much info as possible on these images. But with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and just share my screen and jump into this PDF. Quick. Okay. So this first image is a storekeeper. Everybody's familiar with Smith's bread. Everybody's probably made a sandwich once or twice with some Smith's bread, which and kind of looking through these images, I found out that they started baking bread in their house, and then kind of moved on to where they are now, of course. And it is actually still owned by, I think, the Patarakis family, which is, let me see now, look at my notes, which is still going around. But when you ride through the city, I remember back in the day, you still, over by Emerson Avenue at H&S, you would still smell the bread. When you're riding through, when you roll through Fells Point, you still smell the bread cooking. This is an interesting shot right here. I think this is the Forest Park area. Not quite sure, but the book they're reading is Porgy and Bess. Kind of zoom in on it. And it's always great to see like images like this where you're actually inside of people's homes. And a lot of times, a lot of the images that he shot for the newspaper, you know, a lot of times ended up getting seen by a lot of people, but a big part of his work was just parties and family portraits where they're really intimate shots, and it's really giving you a view into, you know, the different types of homes and different families that he was in touch with. And actually, you also see a lot of images that over the years, as I continue to scan and go through these images, you see actually families grow up, which is interesting. So this image actually, I had someone coming through. I'm working on a book right now, and I had some people coming through to look at some images, and I've seen this image. I've seen most of these images in the database a ton of times, dozens of times at least, and I've looked at this image so many times. And just anybody wants to jump out, what jumps out at you when you look at this image? Just the first thing that jumps out at you.
There's one girl.
There's one girl, and when she saw this image, she was like, they're holding her up. She's on top. They're holding. Just a different step. And the thing about the images is that I can look at them a ton of times, and everyone can think of the beauty of a photograph is that everyone's going to see something different. And I noticed the one girl, but I never really noticed the, you know, kind of significance of them. It's like really holding her up on top of this image. This is another one I love. This is one of the first images that we actually printed when we started to really go back through the images back in '99 when my dad started kind of separating these images and putting them into categories. You know, back then it was like we didn't have a scanner, so it's like if you wanted to see what the image looked like, you had to print it to see what it looked like. And seeing this this kind of canned bass that she's playing with a bass string here and probably either like a stick here that's tied to, but you know, pulling that, strumming that string that's connected to this stick down here that's going to give you that bass sound. So this is if anybody's a Colts fan, Lenny Moore on the left and Big Daddy Lipscomb, which is on the right. And so I'll Here's some notes on this one. So Lenny Moore played for Penn State, Rookie of the Year, 1956, 7-time Pro Bowler, inducted to the Hall of Fame in 1975. And you know, you look at, when you look at sports now, and you look at, that controversy from just Colin Kaepernick kind of taking the knee. About the time when Lenny Moore was playing, there was only about 6 Black players on the team when he started. And he ran into some issues back in the day with trying to be with working for CBS as a sportscaster, where they wouldn't give him a long-term contract. Which is something now where it's like, you see when you watch NBA, you see Shaq and Barkley, and you see all these guys, kind of running down the game and commentating. But, back then, even outside of playing, you're still dealing with these issues in the league today, which, everyone knows. But also, Moore went on to do a lot of work in the city after this. And it's a quote here that was an interesting one. "There was never anybody ever closer than me and the guys that I played football with on that Baltimore team on the field. We were just like glue, one for all for one. But once they blew the whistle and the game was over, they went on their way. We went on our ways. We split. It was race." He actually worked for the Department of Juvenile Services for 26 years, traveling to middle school and high schools, working with at-risk kids. And a lot of people don't know the legacy really that he left was, after football, was really the mark he left on all of these kids doing that kind of work. On the other hand, Big Daddy Lipscomb was an interesting guy. He actually ended up being a wrestler in the off seasons. All the guys back then, most of them had side jobs. I remember Jim Parker had a lounge up on Liberty Heights and Garrison back in the day. But sadly, Lipscomb actually died of an overdose in Baltimore in 1963, which, I didn't know until recently.
Do you know where that quote came from? What the context of it was?
I don't, but I can find it for you. I can send you an email probably. I have it somewhere tucked away.
Thanks.
Jackie's first locker. So I don't know if any of you guys seen the movie 42, where originally going into the locker room, there was basically just a folding chair and a couple nails. And this is actually the event of when he actually got that first locker. It's always interested me, this guy in the back, with the aviators on, that was, kind of guarding the locker room. But it's always just interesting, like the back of these photos, what's in the background. A lot of times catches your eye. And Jackie also had an interesting quote for this one. That morning, I was concerned about the reception I'd be given in the dressing room. Would I be welcome, or will my new teammates be cool and aloof, or even ignore me? Before I opened the dressing room door, I stopped, took a deep breath, and then walked in. Many of the players were already there. I looked for a locker with Jackie Robeson on it, but couldn't find one. I stood in the middle of the room for a while, wondering what to do. There were lockers marked Pee Wee Reese, Dixie Walker, Hugh Casey, Ed Stanky, Bruce Edwards, Pete Reiser, Ralph Branca, Archie Vaughn, and George Jorgensen. In fact, there were lockers for everyone but me. Finally, the clubhouse man saw me. Jackie said, "You'll have to wait a few days. We can get a locker for you." He handed me my uniform. "Dress over there if you don't mind." He pointed to a folding chair. I sat down in my locker and started dressing. So a lot of these, like, the kind of untold stories behind the photos is really one of the more interesting things that you find out after looking at an image. And things just constantly unfold. The more I learn and the more I put these images out there. So this is Jackie, Roy Campanella, and Don Newcomb.
Yeah, Webster, something about what you just said is really interesting. That's kind of what strikes me about these photos, is that the photos themselves can be an entry point into inquiry. So you see an image that you're like, well, it looks sort of benign on the surface, but once you start digging, you learn so much more about it. And so I love that the photos can be something that catches your eye, that sort of pulls you into the history and makes you want to know more about it. And these certainly do that.
Yeah, and like the picture tells 1,000 words thing is so true, but it's like what's behind. And I was having this conversation the other day. It's the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Like with newspaper and kind of photojournalism, one thing that my dad always stressed was, not what's going on, but why, how. You always know the when, you always know when it happened is dated, but really why and the stories behind everything makes it come together.
Yeah.
So this is Hank Aaron and Roy Campanella. It's like batting practice. Sam Lacey, which I know you're familiar with, Savvy, who also covered when Jackie was breaking the color barrier with my grandfather, and lived to be, I think, at least 100 and something, and pretty much wrote for the AFRO until the day he died, which is one of the first guys to enter the Baseball Writers Association of America. But a very interesting guy. My friend actually told me the other day he saw one of these images, and he called up the AFRO to do an interview with Sam Lacey, and he was so nervous that he was mumbling, and Sam gave him a hard time, and he said he hung up and he never got the nerve to call him back. But I was like, that's the last time. I was like, it's a terrible lesson to learn with Sam Lacey. But I was like, he was like, man, I wish that would have happened with somebody else. But I was like, if it didn't happen with somebody else, it wouldn't have been as significant as it was to really have that stick with you and have that lesson. And he was like, yeah, it really changed how we did things from then on.
We have a hand raised here from Kinley. You can
Okay.
unmute yourself to ask your question if you like.
Sure.
Or if you feel more comfortable, you can put it in the chat. I just lost you on here. Maybe it was a hand saying goodbye.
Peace out.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so this is an old school fire scene.
Wow.
You see, you got the bra on the front of the that old school fire truck. Interesting shot.
What I also am really struck by looking at these images, I didn't mention this at the top, but I'm the archives director for the Afro-American newspapers. And so we have a lot of prints in our collection. But with yours, Webster, you're working from negatives, and they're typically 4x5 negatives. So literally 4x5 inches of the most amazing resolution that you could ever see. So when you zoom in on these details, there's just so much that you can see. Like when you went in on that truck, you could see all the details in the fireman's face. It's just so fascinating. And so when you talk about, looking at the background, you have so much access to the details in the background, which really fill in the story also.
Yeah, and I know, from looking at the images, a lot of the prints that went in the paper, they had to wash them out. And Thomas Stockett, who was the graphic designer and amazing political cartoonist, that I was so happy that Savvy, that you shared some of those cartoons with me, would have to draw lines kind of around the photos and wash out the images so that they would show up when they flashed the image, so it would show up in the paper. So even though these images were super detailed, the image that usually went in the paper was more of a really contrasty kind of shot of those images.
Yeah, I
This is
refer to
another kind of favorite image. Exactly. And my dad was like, my dad described him as, if your shoe was untied, he could tie it. If your fly was down, he could zip your fly up. And his paintings, his amazing paintings as well. Thomas Stockett with 2 T's at the end. Photorealism, the way he painted. I have some photos, some scans, some color scans actually in the collection that were the images that he scanned to make prints from the images. And I love this photo.
From Heather Hairston, have you had any of these photos colorized, or do you prefer them to stay in their original black and white?
So I'm actually looking for someone locally who can colorize images. There's some apps that do that, and I posted some photos on the Baltimore, the historic Baltimore site on Facebook, and some people just colorized a couple, and they look great in the apps. But I did want to colorize a few, maybe for a few posters. So if you guys know anybody that is Photoshop whiz, an artist that colorizes images, definitely send it my way. This image with the fishmonger, which is a great image, with an almost 3-pounder fish. But this kid in the background is the guy. I feel like it's the star of the show, with the aviators, with the goggles, with the long straw and the soda pop. This guy looked like, you know, just coming from the market. Just an amazing photo. And Francis Dress Shop is something that I'm gonna have to look up when I go to look at those old phone books in the library. Just another shot, and out of 10,000 4x5s that I scanned, only maybe 100 of them had white folks in them. Baltimore was segregated for the most part, and you just didn't see a lot of interaction unless it was maybe politicians or maybe some businessmen. But looks like they're pitching a tent for maybe a circus in this photo, or some type of fair. And it's just so much going on in this image. And with this kid kind of just jumping out in the center, you know, it's just a great image.
Can you share a little bit about your research process when you are looking for information about? I heard you say, you know, you're going to go check out the old phone books at the library. So when you find little details and text in the image, where do you go from there to learn more about what might be happening in the scene?
So a lot of times I can zoom in on, like, there's a lot of pictures with the AFRO where there are businessmen giving checks and donating, because they used to call on a lot of people from the community, for kind of almost, I feel like, what are like the GoFundMes of now, where, you know, there was some kind of group or something that was going on where they would encourage the businessmen to donate to the newspaper to kind of help with different projects. But for instance, if there's a name of a store in an image, I have a kind of a running list that you can go to. I think since the Maryland Room at the Enoch Pratt, you can look at the old phone books, and if you can find if you can look up the name of the business, you can find the address.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like one way of finding things. But mostly, I usually call on my father or my aunt. We're trying to set up some Zooms with some elders to just float through pictures in the database. Usually when I'm live, and we were doing this kind of before COVID, I would just pull up with my computer and database and projector, and we would just I would try to find out what everyone's area of expertise was in the room, and just kind of pull images based on that. But mostly the internet right now, Facebook, maybe 1 out of every 4 or 5 images that we post, someone recognizes a place or person in the image. But it's kind of a mix of crowdsourcing and some detective work kind of gets us there.
Thank you.
Is there anybody oyster fan or oyster eater in Baltimore? There's a huge oyster hall.
Oh, wow.
Broken up. Can you hear me?
It's a little
So yeah, I'm
patchy,
saying if there are any
yeah.
oyster, a little choppy.
Just a little bit, yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, so I was saying if there's any oyster fans, it's a huge oyster hall on this boat.
Wow.
Kind of just an interesting portrait of these guys hauling in all these oysters. And I'm not quite sure where exactly they are in this one. If anybody recognizes it, feel free to type it in the chat if this background looks familiar to you. I'll keep running. Another interesting shot here, which is Wesley A. Brown, who was the first Black guy who graduated from the Naval Academy, but the 6th one to go. So you can, you know, kind of imagine what was going on back in this time, and he's right here. And the guy next to him, Wesley Brown found out ran cross country, and the guy next to him, I'm not 100% positive, but they say he was friends with Jimmy Carter, I think it was. So they say that this is Jimmy Carter next to him, but big thing about these images is that if I'm not 100% sure, I try not to speculate on those kind of things.
It's a stunning photograph.
The GOAT, recycling. It's the young kids recycling newspapers with the help of the GOAT. And it's like recycling is a thing that people think is like a new thing, you know, but they, you know, they're not delivering these papers. These are definitely old papers that they're collecting.
Mm. Oh, wow.
And this is one of those images where I always wonder, is he going away or is he coming home? You know, which one? But I'm thinking it's going away in this one. It's another interesting shot.
Beautiful.
So the Freedom Train is another interesting one that I'm still kind of learning about, and you would think there would be more information online. On a quick jump into it, I didn't run into a ton of information, but the announcement of the Freedom Train, I think May 22nd, 1947, provoked a spirited commentary on the state of freedom in Black America. Black American poet Langston Hughes wrote a critical poem, Freedom Train, in which he described the Freedom Train passing through the segregated Southern states where Black and white passengers rode in separate cars. The poem was famously recorded by Paul Robeson, facing a public relations backlash, stating the Western Bloc was more free than Blacks in America, which sparked a Truman administration to announce in September 1947 a policy of desegregizing the train. And they ran into some trouble in Tennessee once it was announced that Black and white people would be allowed to visit the Freedom Train, but only during separate visiting hours. So I think what happened after this was the NAACP had their own Freedom Train, which also had a lot to do with just kind of spreading awareness. And there's also some photos in Penn Station with just probably hundreds of people just getting off that train and leaving that stop. This is a Joe Louis shot. And Joe Louis spent a lot of time in Baltimore. He had a whiskey or a bourbon, I think it was. And he also had a punch, Joe Louis Punch. But he went on a tour. So there's a ton of photos of him in bars, pouring shots for people, signing autographs for kids. And there's a couple more of these. So the Joe Louis Punch actually, if you guys know Willie Adams, who's right here, who back in the day, if you needed to get a loan and you were Black and you want to start a business, you couldn't get it from the bank most of the time. So Willie Adams was who you got the loan from. But in turn, he would own 51% of your business. But the Joe Louis Punch was one of his only failed business ventures. And people were just like, it just wasn't that good. It lost its fizz after a while. It started to turn colors in the if you left it out in the sun too long, and it just didn't stick around for too long.
Wow.
And this is Joe Louis signing autographs, and this is actually in the front of the bottling company, and down to the clock, they even had the Joe Louis Punch on the part of the clock that swung,
Wow.
which you can kind of see right here. And there's an outside shot of this building too, where like the runoff into the street is, you know, like hundreds of people deep. It's him also in school signing autographs, and this kid has a punch bottle in his hand. So this is actually Willie Adams at the Park Sausages factory. They started along with Henry Parks, which was one of the first publicly traded Black companies in America. Incredibly, this is definitely the very beginnings of that. Just another Joe Louis shot in the ring. This is Paul Robeson picketing Ford's Theater, and they say they picketed this theater for 3 years until it hurt the theater's bottom line so much that it cut their sales in half, and they finally dropped the racist policy like around 1952.
Wow. We have a question from Stephen Ragsdale. Have you run across any pictures of Joe Louis playing golf down at Carroll Park? It's been noted that he frequented the place.
So I think there's one image I think we do have of him playing golf, but I didn't scan it in that last batch of images.
So coming soon.
Yeah, exactly, coming soon. And there's a really interesting photo that says this golf course will be closed to white players, I think like June 15th or something, 1950. It was an interesting shot, and I ended up getting some information about my uncle, who's a huge golfer, about that kind of story.
Can you share a little bit?
So basically, they with Separate But Equal, a lot of the golf courses that the Blacks were at, weren't really up to par with a lot of the other courses. And so they started to give designated days of the week for when Black people and white people could play. But, that really didn't go anywhere. And at the same time, the same kind of thing with the Ford's Theater, it was hurting the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think finally that kind of went to the wayside eventually. But it was just another one. There's another shot of where they're talking about Separate Equal with Morgan State and the colleges, where there's some signs that say 900 phys ed majors, no gym,
Mm-hmm.
a stable for an auditorium, and there's some signs that kind of have infographics written on them where it says University of Maryland. It's a whole bunch of blocks stacked up, and then there's like Morgan, and there's like 2 blocks right there, which was just like one of those common threads back then with the Separate But Equal, but it's like,
Yeah, Steve
wasn't equal.
Ragsdale says it took 2 lawsuits to desegregate Baltimore golf. So just a little added context in there.
I meant to look up those lawsuits.
Can we have larger views of these photos, please? They're really marvelous.
Sure, let me make the screen a little larger. See someone there with a magnifying glass that's really getting into it.
Yes, which is great. We have a raised hand from Nina. So Nina, you can, oh, and now it's gone. Okay, this is weird.
Back, Nina.
Come back, Nina. You can ask your question. All right, Nina's gone.
Avenue Street scene, and my favorite of this shot is always right here. And I'm like, where's the motorcycle? Is it just a look? Is it just a style, or is it
Wow,
down to the gloves?
that's commitment.
Yes, sir. Hey. And then even like this guy right here, where it seems like almost no one else in the photo is looking at my grandfather except for this guy right here, who seemed to kind of just like zero right in on him.
Heather Hairston has a question. Did your dad or grandfather ever talk about
Another thing?
Sorry, can you hear me? Maybe I'm on a delay.
You broke up a little bit, but I heard you. Did they ever talk about what?
Did your dad or grandfather ever talk about their techniques for capturing the moment? I always think that photographers have to walk that line of putting themselves out there to have access, but they also need to stay invisible, not to interfere or become part of the moment themselves.
I think it's like I mean, from what I've learned from my father and going out with him, was when I was maybe like 9 or 10, I started going out with him on the weekends and taking photos. And he would always tell me to get the photos that he couldn't get because they weren't looking at me. And my vantage point as someone younger was to be able to kind of maneuver through and kind of catch that B-roll shot. It's almost like if you're shooting a wedding, you got the main guy and then you got the guy who can get the mom crying or somebody doing something, or, you know, more of a, maybe what people say is like an artistic shot, but it's a thin line between not being afraid to go to the front and get in front of everyone to get that shot and then get out of the way, but also to try to be a fly on the wall so that you can really catch what's going on naturally. And as technology advanced and, you know, you could put longer lenses on and take more photos, like with the 4x5 camera, a lot of what I used to hear back in the day was, you know, he might go out and only have 4 images, 4 shots for a job to get everything. So you take a wide shot, you get the main shot with all of the people and, you know, all the notables or whoever the editor told you to get a shot of. And then you might be able to get a couple shots for yourself. But also my grandfather and my father talking about how much extra film they used to buy because they wanted to get more than maybe was allotted for them for that particular job. If you're going out to take, you know, 4 or 5 or 6 jobs in a day and really having enough to really cover the event.
We have a question. Was that Pennsylvania Avenue in Baltimore?
It is Pennsylvania Avenue. And a big thing back then was the Lincoln Douglas sale.
Thank you. That was the next question that was in here.
Yeah, which is, I think just tying together the Lincoln and Abraham and Frederick Douglass's birthday. But especially on Pennsylvania Avenue, there's a lot of different signs, different years where you see these same signs where it was kind of like almost now where they have Labor Day sales and, you know, Memorial Day and all these different sales. But the Lincoln Douglas sale was a big sale back then, and I guess kind of fell through over the years.
But it's great because then it also pinpoints, you know, the date. You have a sense of when the date is.
Exactly.
You know, so you're getting all these details from the image. I think that's it. Yeah, okay, Julia, you saw your hand up and then you asked that question. Got it. Okay. Thank you.
This is Young Red Fox, backstage at the Royal. And you can even see down to like the writing on the wall. Hugh Smith and the Clowns were here. Open the Door, Little Booker. You know, Robert C. and Pat M. Cookies Men Shot, which I don't know is the same. I don't know if that's Cookies. So I remember there was a Cookies back in the day in Mount Mall. If it's the same Cookies or if that says Cookers. Can't tell. But also even down to the Viceroys and the pack of Marlboros right here. And this same, I think, trip when Red was there was a wedding that he was in of a few people. So there's a few shots he's getting married, which I think also was a recurring theme. There's another shot of Louis Armstrong, who's standing next to a couple that's cutting a cake. I'm pretty sure is also at the Royal, and he's holding a Boston Terrier under his arm. This is the marquee, the Royal Marquee from that day. A bunch of names.
I love it.
It's a Sarah Vaughan image. So Nat King Cole backstage. And a lot of times there was a York Hotel was around the corner, which is where a lot of the celebrities would stay. And but if you see here, a lot of the dressing rooms also had a bed back there for if they wanted to, you know, if they were there for the weekend, you know, you could crash, maybe, you know, save a trip to the hotel.
Wow.
And they really turned the dressing rooms into their own spaces.
Can you zoom in a little on that one? Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow, that hair.
Yeah, I want to say fried dye laid to the side.
I'm talking about hers. Like it's a wave.
Right, that's what I'm thinking.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Couple books, looks like a Bible maybe. This is actually the York Hotel right here, which was on, I think, I know the cross street was Dolphin, but it's slipping me. It might have been on Madison and Dolphin, or I don't think it was on Pennsylvania and Dolphin.
Yeah, it was
But I
on
know
Madison.
Madison and Dolphin.
It was Loyal Randolph's place.
Okay. And I think this he has I didn't want to say his name and get it wrong, but it's another shot where he's holding a book and you can see the name on the book. And I think it is would you say Loyal Randolph?
Yeah, but I don't think that's Loyal Randolph.
Yeah.
But he Loyal owned the York Hotel.
Now I gotta go back and look at that. I gotta write that down and go back and look at that picture with him in the book.
I love it. So we're at about 7:45, so we still have a good chunk of time to look at some more images. And, you know, please feel free to ask questions, unmute yourself if you have a question, or type it in the chat if that's easier for you, more comfortable for you, and we'll get your question answered.
Yeah, and the database is accessible right now. So if there's anything in particular that you might want to look up that I might be able to search, I can type it in and see if anything pops up. The Sphinx Club right here, which was another Baltimore kind of staple, which was like the spot before the spot and the spot after the spot, if you were on the avenue. And this is one of the only pictures where I know it's the Sphinx Club, even though sometimes if you can see the roof for certain things, or like these vents in some of the other pictures, I can tell from this image that I definitely know it's the Sphinx Club. But there's so many shots in these small bars that a lot of times it's just really hard to tell. This is an unknown band that I still haven't identified yet. So there's a lot of shots with this, I think maybe weekend where these showgirls were in town. But another group that I just still haven't ran across yet. So if you guys know any jazz historians or Baltimore music folks that might know some of these jazz images, we have a ton of those that are unidentified that we could use some knowledge on. This is another one with the Lincoln Douglas cell in the background. This is Billie Holiday on Pennsylvania Avenue, coming out of the store with the brown bag. And at first, when we were printing this image analog, I didn't really see this guy right back here with the shades on and the hat. That he was like kind of popped out at me recently. But another just really, really interesting shot.
We do have a request for any images of Arch Social Club. If you can take a look, if you think you have something in there.
So I know if I don't think I have any. I probably have some images in Arch Social Club, but I'm not quite sure. So that's an image where if I did search it, it probably wouldn't come up.
Gotcha.
But I know they've just started. They've been doing events in there recently. I know some young folks in the last couple of years have been doing some images. I think Butch Dawson shot a video there like last year. There's a young rapper from Baltimore that ended up shooting a great video there. A Rondo ice cream shop, which even to this day, next to every theater you would see in a Rondo ice cream. And even now, like the theater that's in Harbor East, there's a Haagen-Dazs kind of American thing. There's always an ice cream shop next to the movies.
We have a question here from Catherine Evans. Would you talk a bit about the scope of the project you're undertaking? How many images? What kind of support are you getting?
So right now, maybe almost a decade ago, I started scanning, and I scanned 10,000 4x5 negatives. So right now in my database, there's 10,000 plus of these type of images from the early 40s to the mid 60s. Only about a quarter of them, maybe a third now identified. So I stopped scanning to kind of go back, tag everything so I could find them in a database. And then go out and try to get some more historical information about them. So like we're working on a book right now to have that information for the book, but also when we end up putting the bulk of these images on our website, to have more historical information to kind of be used as a learning aid and kind of be used as a resource for educators. And right now, not a ton of outside help. We do have, we've been doing some shows. We do have some prints available on our website. So, you know, if you jump over to the website and get a print, you're supporting the project. We have gotten 1 or 2 small grants. We just recently got a grant from the Grit Fund to do some ID projects, and we had just kind of gotten a full swing when COVID happened, going to the senior centers around Baltimore once or twice a month, and actually having some young students record audio and also shoot some photos for these sessions that was going to really culminate in the show, where we just show all of the images that were identified along with those photos and that audio. But if anybody has resources, or if anybody knows of people who have interest in these images, pretty much we license images, and we kind of been floating around, but mostly anything that has to do with the images kind of goes directly back into the project. So if you get a print, if you get we also do sessions where if you'd like to schedule a private session to kind of look through the database and see if there are any images that you're interested in, that's really how the project is supported, through the community and through everyone that kind of shows interest in this project.
We should talk offline too, because
Definitely.
there's things to do. We got things.
Definitely.
There is another question here. Do you have any images of the Progressive Party in Baltimore when Paul Robeson came to town? I saw one when I visited your father when we tried to get him a grant for this collection. This is from Ed Papenfus.
Okay, so I can pull up, I'm going to flow through these, and I can type in Paul Robeson, who definitely spent a lot of time, seems like, in Baltimore. I'm not sure if the Progressive Party images may not jump out at me, maybe just because I didn't know who was in the images with him, and he might recognize some of those people. But I can definitely type in Paul Robeson and see if anything jumps out when we run through these. I think we're getting down to the end. This is a Lionel Hampton shot. Was another guy. This is an in-store kind of record promo where they would go around the record shops. It looks like this guy's kind of studying maybe the blisters or the wear and tear on Lionel Hampton's hand. This is the International Sweethearts of Rhythm, which was the first integrated all-woman big band. And I think for a little while, there's some pictures of Blanche Calloway with them, was Cab Calloway's sister, who I think was the band leader at some point. This is Louis backstage. And everyone always talks about my favorite in the picture right here is like, he's always showing up. Unimpressed. She's heard that song before. But there's a lot of shots, actually. There's a shot with him backstage with his wife, where there's a drink under him, where it looks like somebody just dropped a drink and they kind of all hanging out backstage. And I'm pretty sure he has the same suit on. I think it was that same weekend or that same night. But even down to how they would set up the dressing room with their own pictures up to really make it at home. If you were in town for the weekend, that was your spot, you know. It's another nice shot. And you can kind of, if you look, you can see my grandfather's car here, where to get that nice shot, you know, he wouldn't always necessarily use the tripod, but would just maybe sit the camera on top of the car to get a shot like this. Which is I love, with just the movement in the photo and the neon signs.
That's beautiful.
A lot of costume parties and theme parties. You know, this guy's got the scepter. And all of these aren't costumes that you're gonna go to, you know, getting off Amazon back then. Like, these costumes were made by someone for this event, you know, or thrown together to look the costume. This guy's got the sword and the Louisville Slugger, or the Holla Black and Bladsby. Louisville Slugger, you know. This is one of those things that, like, after looking at this photo, I just noticed that not too long ago, and he got his leg up on the xylophone. You know,
He's the
silk
life of the
lining.
party.
Yeah, it's kind of a silky velvet lining the stage there. Another interesting shot, and people always see the Cadillac, they see the bikini, they don't always see the car phone that she's on. And I'm pretty sure this is Carr's Beach, but there was another couple of beaches that blacks would frequent back then. So it's another one that I'm not quite positive, but Carr's Beach has a really rich history. If you look that up, the CARRS. I'm not gonna go into it because I want to keep running through these, but definitely something worth looking up. It's Mondawmin Mall, and this stairwell is still there, right in the center of the mall with the fountain. It's another interesting shot. This is probably one of my favorite shots right here. And I'll send a free pack of postcards to anybody who can tell me what this animal is right here.
If you got a guess, put it in the chat.
First person to put what animal that is in the chat, I'll send a free pack of postcards to.
Do they have to be correct, or do they just have to guess?
They have to be correct.
Okay.
They have to be correct. They got to be
We
on
have badger, groundhog, wombat, possum.
Wombat.
All right,
Wombat.
Jan, you win. So
So
Jan,
Yay!
Jan, you
Yay!
can send me a private message with your
Yeah.
address, and we'll get you a pack of postcards.
Awesome. I love wombats. and also just to throw in something, the last image of Carr's Beach. So I grew up next to Carr's Beach in Annapolis. We lived in Annapolis Road. So I used to go over to Carr's Beach quite frequently. It was the happening place to be.
So if you when I get your info, maybe if you want to connect on another Zoom and I can go through some Carr's Beach images, you might be able to give me some insight on those if you used to frequent there.
Okay, sure.
And I'm
that'd be
guessing
great.
this was a situation where the AFRO probably I think it was an instance where maybe the AFRO was giving them, like, maybe had a clothing drive or something and was maybe dropping off these different clothes to them. But a lot of them, the images are just a mystery, like this one. It's like a doe, a fox hanging up in front of a barbershop, which just is a puzzling shot. And you run into these all the time where a lot of images you could guess, you might think you know what's going on. This is one where it's just, eventually someone's gonna see it and know exactly what's going on here.
Right.
But they're not field dressing this animal. You know, it's just one of the most random images. Postman.
So Webster, Steve Ragsdale put 2 cases in the chat for golf desegregation. Golf desegregation. Oh my gosh. So I just copied down those notes, but it's in the chat in case you want it, and I'll send that to you after.
All right, appreciate that. And you know, it wouldn't be complete without.
Ooh, terrifying.
Which is also, this is like another one of those. Yeah, that's what I said. The presentation wouldn't be complete without a creepy clown. We'll move on from this one. So this is the colored pool at Drew Hill Park, pre-segregation. This is also the colored pool, which is now filled in with installation by Joyce Scott that I think was done in the early 2000s or the late 90s. I actually got a shot of this pool in 99, I think right before the installation happened. And this is another shot of someone kind of gazing in on the other pool, which is still there now, which is everyone's pool now, but kind of seeing the image of, you know, being that guy outside the pool, outside the gate. this is one of the other crazy stories that I know Savannah actually sent me an article on this. You want to kick a little bit on this one real quick? Just
Go
give a
ahead.
little bit of background.
Go ahead. You go
You
ahead.
know, you probably know it better than me.
Okay. You put me on the spot because now I have to remember. But the crux of the story is that this was a ploy by the AFRO to bring attention to restaurant segregation, diner segregation along Route 40. And so there were diplomats from newly independent African countries that were traveling to DC, and on their way out of town, wherever they were going next, often they would be on Route 40. And so because they were Black, whether they're diplomats or not, these diners were turning them away. So eventually, because the United States had to be a good diplomatic partner, they, made exceptions around segregation for diplomats who were coming to town. So AFRO reporters were charged with dressing up as quote unquote African diplomats to go test this case, so to go test these diners on Route 40 to see if they would be served or not. And so this is a photograph of AFRO staff before they rented a limousine. They like put on costumes, did the whole works to go test to see if they would be served at these diners. So that's the truncated version with no details, because I don't have all of the details.
Yeah.
But that's,
you wrapped it up perfectly. But I mean, that story, that article, it was AFRO uses wild comedy. I think it was in the title.
Right.
Got a doctor with some high tech equipment there. This is an interesting shot here. This is Tucker's service stations, which was on Lafayette and Gilmore. And we posted this photo online, and this young gentleman right here reached out to me online. His name was Irv Tucker, and he gave me a write-up on this service station. And I think some of his write-up was in Ron Cassie did the Great Migration image, the Great Migration article in the Baltimore Magazine, I think features the write-up from Irv Tucker somewhere in there.
Allison just shared a note that she loves that there are women in this photograph.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So we are at 8 o'clock. We mentioned to you earlier, Webster, if you want to keep going and if people are interested, we can go for a little bit longer, but we do want to be respectful of people's time. And I also want to make sure that we get that Paul Robeson search in for Ed before it's all said and done.
Definitely. Well, let me drop if I can find the chat somewhere here.
I know when you're sharing, it's hard to find it.
That's Frank. Yeah, I'm looking. It was just on the screen.
Oh.
Okay, here it is. Let me find the chat. Is it? Let's find the chat. No, it's Frank and Frank. It's Frank and Frank. My friend's here, and he's remotely in the session, but he's like, "Is that your dad? Is that Frank?" So this is my Uncle Frank in this image, and this is a great example of Stockett's Photoshop. So this is my Uncle Frank and one of my aunts that I can't quite remember in this wagon, but also Frank pulling the wagon in the image. Okay. So you
when we
kind of
talked
see,
earlier, yeah, go ahead.
You can kind of see that layer right there where he's cut out. But it's a great job of early Photoshop. Let me try to find that.
Analog Photoshop.
Exactly.
Cut and paste.
So yeah, I don't seem to be able to have the option to type in the chat now, but I'm gonna go ahead and pull up those Paul Robeson images. Okay. And I definitely want to urge everyone to go over to ihenryphoto.com and browse through. There's an about section with with some videos. There's some links to actually that Great Migration article and some other articles. And also, if you're interested in getting any prints, there's about 9 or 10 prints that are available on the site that your purchase greatly helps us keep this thing going and, you know, keep things moving. So I can keep finding out information on these photos and kind of keep digging deep to get this this history there. So I'm going to close this and I'm going to go ahead and search Paul Robeson real quick.
Steve said that last one of all the people was an iconic photograph. Double exclamation points, triple
Appreciate
exclamation.
it. That was actually, so you know what? I'm bringing that one back up. We're running it back. So this is the one that I mentioned earlier where you get those separate but equal at the State House, a stable for an auditorium. Mus Morgan remains second rate. And this is the one with that infographic that I mentioned.
Yeah.
You see University of Maryland and the deck is stacked. Is this equal? And you see 900 phys ed majors, no gym. And even down to like the people in the windows, just kind of watching, like, you know, the guys who are making the laws, making the policies, kind of just, you know, back in the window, you know.
It's a great photo.
Yeah. And this is one of those images where it's like you can't help but see something different every time you look at it. Like this is one of those images you could look at for hours. Yeah. Let's type in Paul Robeson.
Heather, go ahead and unmute if you'd like.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention while he's searching that we have some people from one of the city schools here from City Neighbors Charter School. And I don't want to put them on the spot, but I just wanted to mention that earlier this past fall, they did a photojournalism project with the students and they sent them out to capture images on election day. And it was really fun for me to be able to take my daughter out and go to the polling places and have, you know, see the photographs that she took. And they did this for the middle schoolers. So I don't want to keep them from talking if they're interested in talking, but I also didn't want to put them on the spot. But I am very thankful that they are joining us tonight.
Yeah, feel free to jump in. My friend taught at City Neighbors a while back, and I went in and spoke to some students there. And actually, there's an image of, speaking of voting, Dr. Camper, who was influential guy in Baltimore and had a lot to do with very influential when it comes to politics and the vote. There's a picture of him actually leaving a voting station. So it's interesting that you said that just now when we have that image of Paul Robeson up. And there's probably some images of Dr. Camper if we go to these next couple images.
Heather asks, who was the friend who taught at City Neighbors?
Odessa. This is maybe 3 or 4 years ago, 2, 3 years ago. Odessa. Odie.
Great.
And this is actually Dr. Camper right here, with another Joe Lewis, young Joe Lewis in this one. And this brother right here, who there's another shot of him singing in a bar. And I want to say his name was Sleepy something when it was identified, but that might have just been my dad messing with me because of this photo. So I can't. But there, this is Dr. Camper right here that I mentioned, was the guy leaving the voting booth. It's that other shot I hadn't picked up before. There. It's Dr. Camper event. And actually, here's the Progressive Citizens of America, 328 North Charles Street. So I don't know if this is one of the shots you were referring to with the Progressive Party. So I wonder what's at 328 North Charles Street right now.
Let's see.
Let's see.
The internet is amazing. Mike O'Shea's Irish Pub.
Mick O'Shea's. Wow.
Oh yeah, Mick O'Shea's. Whoop.
Mick O'Shea's.
Imagine that.
That's wild.
Oh wow, yeah, wow.
Yeah, right on the corner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So it looks like we come to the end of the Paul Robeson shots.
Anybody else have any search requests before we wrap up for the evening? All right,
I have one.
great.
You should have one with Paul Robeson and Henry Wallace, who was the presidential candidate for the Progressive Party.
So these are all of the Paul. You know what? Let me type in Paul. So these are, I think, are all of the Paul Robeson shots, and that image that you might have seen back in the day might not have got scanned in this batch, and so I might not have that image.
That's all right. I was just curious. It's a very good shot, I think, of both of Henry Wallace and Paul Robeson.
The next request that we have.
Is this it?
That's Henry Wallace. There you are.
There it
That's
is.
Henry Wallace. That's Paul Robeson. And that's
Henry Wallace on the left.
Yes, that's the presidential candidate for the Progressive Party. He used to be the secretary of, I think, agriculture for a while. At any rate, he was.
And vice president, I
And
think.
he was vice president of the United States too. But nobody remembers vice presidents.
So I got to add it to my notes now.
This is a good shot.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
That's actually the one I remember. So you did get it. I'm not sure who the person is on the right.
We have two other requests here. Steve, I'm going to combine your request into one and just ask for Morgan State photos, any photos from Morgan State. And then the second request is from Dean Krimmel for Lexington Market photos.
Okay. So I've looked up Lexington Market recently, and there's not a ton of them. There's a lot of Morgan State stuff.
Gigantic files.
Yeah, huge files. Like this is when I was scanning these images at 1600 DPI. So it's huge files.
So we can make a billboard if we need to.
Exactly. So I'll just flip through some of these quick.
Beautiful. Allison says, I'm all about the fashion, the coats, hats, everything. And Jan says a thank you. Thank you very much, Webster. Joe Tropea says, thanks for doing this.
And thank you guys for coming out. Definitely.
Wow, that hair. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Like I say, speaking of coats and hats.
That's fantastic. Yeah, what I'm struck by also is, and I know this is also a balancing act that we have to do with these images, is we've seen just a small portion of them online because you kind of you sacrifice a number of images to the internet that they'll be dragged down, reused, reshared without proper attribution. And it's kind of infuriating when it happens sometimes.
Definitely.
Because people always think that anything that's on the internet is for free use. And so you have to kind of like limit the number that you share in order to maintain the integrity of your own collection.
Definitely.
And so thank you, Webster.
I had to leave this one up for a little
Thank you. But what I'm struck by is just that, there's just such a depth to this collection, and there's so many different types of images that you have in there. Wait, I might need a print.
I'm going to send you these.
Okay.
This is Savannah's family right here in
Yeah.
this shot right here with the champagne on
So
it.
yes, that's Carl Murphy in the middle, and his wife Vashti Turley Murphy next to him, and they're 5 girls. My grandmother is standing up behind Vashti, is Frances Louise Murphy II. Yeah, thank you. That's beautiful.
Reminds me of somebody I know.
I love it. I love it. Steve Ragsdale says, my dad was a biomedical photographer at Johns Hopkins Medicine from 1957 until 1997. I wonder if he knew your folks.
I wonder, and someone actually asked me if I had any photos of Black doctors at Hopkins. And I have some images of Hopkins and a bunch of images of doctors, but I'm just not sure if the two were intertwined. So if you leave me some information, if you have that scope of images, you might have some of those in your collection. I definitely like to speak with you. These ladies here were, I think, played piano and were 2 twins that were staying at Morgan. And I think were followed around for an article.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Okay.
They are again twins.
I have a question for our board.
And if anybody's interested in
oh, sorry.
Okay.
I have a question for our board. There's a question about when this recording will be available, and I typically have not been responsible for that part, so I don't actually have an answer to that. Does anybody else have it?
Yeah, it usually takes us about a week to get it up online. So we'll let you know, and I'll share it with the social media people. So it'll be on our Facebook. And I did drop a link in for the YouTube page. So if you just check there, it'll be there.
Yeah, I'll reshare those links.
If I could hop in here, we'll have news of this on our Baltimore History Facebook page.
Yes.
So if you'd like to sign up, go to Facebook and find Baltimore History and ask to join that would be great. And Webster also has a fine Facebook page that lists a lot of his stuff. So Facebook can be a good resource.
Yeah, if you type in facebook.com/ihenryphoto, we come right up.
I'm going to put the link in the chat right now.
Definitely. And definitely drop the link for the website in for me as well.
We'll do that. Okay.
And these photos have changed my life. Tomorrow I'm going to go out and buy a fedora.
I'm gonna need a picture of that on the Facebook. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here tonight. I don't want to take up too much of everyone's time. First of all, thank you, Webster, for sharing this collection with us. It's been really just such a treat to be able to.
And thank you guys for showing up.
Yeah, I want to say another round of thanks to our sponsors, Trace Architects and Arcadia Publishing, and to everybody who's here tonight. Our next event is April 15th, and it will be at 7:30 as opposed to 7 p.m. So that's just a small change. All of the information can be found at BaltimoreCityHistoricalSociety.org or on our Facebook page. All of those links are currently in the chat. So when we close this down, the chat will be gone. So if you want to follow those links, click them now and you'll have them there. But from all of us at the Baltimore City Historical Society, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you in April. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Savannah.
Peace.
Thanks, Webster.